Okay, hello everybody. We are here today with my friend James Leake and his sister um, Catherine Leake, and they're both very educated and bright minds on politics, culture, law, and many other things. So I thought we could today talk about the US Supreme Court and the politics that surrounds it almost at the what should I say in the campaigning phase of every major political election in the US. So James is a graduate in law. He studied law at the University of York and then did a master's in law at the University of York. And Catherine studied a bachelor's degree in human, social, and political sciences at the University of Cambridge. She finished last year. So she is very qualified to talk about politics in general. And yeah, so we can start with some talking points on the US Supreme Court and the politics that surrounds it. So James, let's start with, let's start with whatever you want to start with. Just choose a topic and go wild with it.
Um, yeah, well, I think we have to talk about one of the quickest turnarounds in precedented behavior for a
Mm-hmm.
Senate
Mm-hmm.
charged with confirming presidential appointees to the Supreme Court in history. 4 years turnaround from positions is pretty remarkable.
4 years and a few months, one has to mention. Like Scalia died in February, right?
He did. So I think as they kept repeating as the Democrats kept repeating during the hearings yesterday, of the bits I saw anyway, it's 260 something days. I think they said between the election day and the day Scalia died, and that was back then to the Republicans too short of a time, and but now, obviously, only a matter of a few short weeks away. This is considered an appropriate timeline, and I think really, as far as the Constitution and the laws governing the process are concerned, there's really nothing they're doing wrong now. It's all about their position 4 years ago, which was just completely untenable.
Right.
But then really, I don't think any of us ever really would have looked at the position they took and considered that it was of any kind of sound legal or reasoned justification. It was just a matter of political maneuvering, and obviously it paid off dividends for them. So, but I guess that's just the nature of it.
And do you think Judge Amy Coney Barrett will be confirmed before Election Day?
I think it's almost certain that the way that they are. I mean, once you control the agenda, if you're in the majority in either of the houses, you control the agenda, you control the timetabling. So
but a couple of votes this way.
Well, a couple of votes this way, but I didn't really. I mean, that's the hardest part to predict. Whatever happens, she will get a vote, and
yeah, and that in itself is newsworthy.
Yeah, I think most likely case I'd say it's between two scenarios, each one equally likely. She gets confirmed 51 to 49. Or she gets confirmed 51 to 50, with Mike Pence coming in once again to make the deciding vote. So I think that I don't see any other possible outcome at the moment apart from those two.
Yeah, well,
could be wrong.
Who was the first female Supreme Court Justice? Sandra
Day O'Connor.
Sandra Day O'Connor. Wasn't she confirmed in a matter of weeks or something in the build-up to the election in
1984?
Reagan's first election, was it not?
Yes, so it would have been his re-election, I would have thought.
Okay, 84.
Yeah.
Not 80. Oh, all right, I see. Oh,
no,
yeah, she was a conservative appointee, yes, of course.
Yeah, she was, indeed. Yeah. Became the swing vote, though.
Right. But in that case, why was there a similar conversation in that case?
No, there wasn't, because it wasn't a thing. at the time.
Hmm.
This is not something that has been, and it was amazing watching one of the bits I watched yesterday from the hearing.
Yeah,
Uh, Ted Cruz over video feed give a very, very detailed look through the past 150 years of
it was the
every
same,
time that a seat
very
has
same
become.
Ted Cruz who was choosing to not look at that history while like spouting.
Oh, well, they've made, he's done a sort of, they've changed how the way their argument lays. So before the argument, in 2016, the argument was that um, it is that there's no precedent for confirming a Supreme Court justice during an election cycle. They said after the primary started, right? The formal primaries, that is. Now, the argument is, and this is what Ted Cruz was going on about yesterday when he was breaking down the numbers of every time that this had happened, saying that there is no precedent for a Senate of a different party to the president to confirm his nominee during an election year, which is obviously a much more long-winded version of what they came out with in 2016, which leaves a very helpful door open to say that they are justified appointing
Right.
the nominee of a president that belongs to the same party as controlled
Sure.
by the
Sure, sure,
Senate.
sure, sure, sure. Yeah.
Which obviously, to those who know the 2016 debacle well, just think he's saying that with like out an ounce of kind of irony, but that's just it's a theatre, I think, in those sort of hearings. And
Just to get the maths, and I'll go to Catherine after this. Had Merrick Garland been confirmed before November 2016, would the liberals like had? I mean, wait a second. What would have been the numbers like for the liberals had Garland been confirmed?
it wouldn't have looked good. Um, the Senate was controlled by the Republicans, so they could have technically given him a hearing
No, no,
and
no,
put
no.
it.
I'm not talking about that. I'm saying, say Garland was confirmed
Mhm,
before November 2016, uh,
yes.
with Garland in place of Scalia. What would the numbers have looked like? Do you remember?
Do you mean on terms of on the court,
Yeah,
or
on the
like,
court.
like liberal and conservative?
Uh-huh.
It would have it
Five
would
four
have flipped 5-4 to the liberals.
to the liberals, and John Roberts like often like sides with the liberals in his judgments, doesn't he?
Increasingly at the moment,
Yeah,
yes.
he did a couple of times over Obamacare, I think. No, so what I'm saying is, do you think had that happened, the Democrats would have gone to court to try to, I don't know, push something vis-a-vis the popular vote thingy in 2016? No, right? Or
The
yes?
pop. How do you mean the popular
I mean,
victory?
the fact that Clinton won the popular vote by a very big margin, uh,
Sure.
and I mean, I don't know, like I remember in 2012 there was some noise about how Obama how there had been some fraudulent voting, and I can't remember Iowa or Illinois.
Right.
So I'm saying, like, of course, foul play isn't the monopoly of any one political party. I mean, of
Mhm.
course, if they see something is going to be politically convenient to them, they're going to try it. Let's make that assumption. So I'm saying, with that assumption made, do you think the Democrats would have tried taking some case regarding the election results to the Supreme
Uh,
Court in
they wouldn't.
2016?
Oh, they
Had,
wouldn't have
had Garland been confirmed and had,
they wouldn't have had a leg to stand on.
right,
Really.
yeah,
And there was, the only example of in history that we can ever refer back to is obviously Bush v.
just before.
Gore,
Yeah, we'll come to that. Yeah.
and but that wasn't a simple case of. Clinton lost to Trump in the Electoral College on more than just one
Mm-hmm.
state.
Mm-hmm.
She would have needed, either a very, very big state like
Florida,
Texas,
Florida. Yeah, 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 yeah.
and should have needed more than just Florida on its own, or I think should have needed
Florida, Texas,
several should have needed
Pennsylvania.
several states. Yeah, I mean, there's didn't have a leg to stand on in that respect.
Okay. So, Catherine, what do you make of the politics surrounding this? Do you think when people make the argument that the 2016 election was actually about the Supreme Court seat, do you think they make a fair point, or is it a bit of a stretch to say that? because sometimes people will say it was about racism. Sometimes people will say it was about, I don't know, immigration. Sometimes people say it was about losing coal mining jobs. Then suddenly someone will say, oh no, it was about the seat that Mary Garland could have filled, which was eventually filled by Gorsuch.
Yeah,
Yes.
I don't think, well, I certainly don't think that a majority of Americans voted for Clinton or Trump based on the Supreme Court. I think 2016 was very much a year of populism, and I don't think that's isolated to just America.
Right.
Obviously, we saw it in the UK with Brexit as well. But yeah, I think Donald Trump represented, an anti-establishment candidate.
Anti-establishment, right? Yeah.
Essentially, yeah, he was an outsider. He'd never held any degree of political office, and I think people saw him as an opportunity for change, really. And I think because he was such an outsider and didn't have any political experience in that respect, I think that's the reason that so many people, particularly actually in the academic field, didn't think he was going to win at all. I was in my first year of university when that election took place, and my lecturer, who was the head of politics at Cambridge at the time, said to us a few days before the election that he didn't think Trump would win. And then I had a lecture with him a day later after the election, and he was just baffled and gobsmacked, to be honest. And I think it represents a very important shift, and the fact that lots of people very much underestimated what the feelings of the American people were in 2016.
But on the point that you made about the 2016 vote having been an anti-establishment vote, and you like drew a parallel with Brexit. Just a side note: can Brexit be called an anti-establishment vote? Because if you look at people like Farage, Johnson, they weren't anti-establishment people. Like Farage had been an MEP for quite some time in 2016. Johnson had been an MP. Johnson became an MP when, in 2000 or something, right?
Well, he was
Sorry,
London mayor for quite a long time.
oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
MP before that, and then became an MP
MP
again in 2015.
15.
Yeah, it was quite
He was
recent.
the mayor. Yes, he was the mayor before Sadiq Khan, right?
Yeah, he was. And obviously his term as London mayor finished in 2016, I believe.
Right, yes. So is anti-establishment the correct phrase, or would you rather go with something like, I don't know, anti-incumbency or something?
I'd say in the terms of Brexit, when we talk of anti-establishment, we should refer much more to the anti-establishment feeling towards the European Union
Right,
rather
yes.
than British political establishments.
Right, yes.
A lot of what drove the Brexit campaign was this idea of taking back control, and that was very much not taking back control from Westminster. It wasn't about giving control to the local regions. It was very much about taking control back from the EU and from Brussels and bringing it back to Westminster. And I think in terms of the kind of individuals who very much pioneered the Brexit movement and were very for that, whilst they themselves, I don't think, can be considered anti-establishment for the reason you just said. Boris Johnson's been an MP, he's been a mayor, similar with Farage. I think their characters represent a more kind of anti-establishment feel in that they're very different from other politicians within their party. Someone like Boris Johnson is so different compared to David Cameron in how they go about political life. So whilst they're definitely not considered anti-establishment in the same way as Trump, they're not political outsiders. They've not come from nowhere like he did. They very much represent a very different type of politician.
And like coming back to the US election, if we make the assumption, if we sort of concede that it is probably not very probable that a huge population of voting age Americans will vote thinking, well, if I vote for this president, then I will get so and so as a Supreme Court justice, and I will get a majority or a super majority or whatever on the benches of the Supreme Court. I mean, if we grant that assumption, if we make that assumption, to what degree can we say then that factor can play a role in people's minds? while say they're in the election booths. Like this year, like can that be turned into a major factor behind like changing people's minds, or would you say it's too late already? Like people who are going to vote for Trump have already made up their minds that they're going to vote for Trump, and like
I'd say with regard to if people vote depending on the Supreme Court and who they could potentially, what sort of justice they could end up with depending if they vote for the Democrat candidate or the Republican candidate. I'd say all the people that care about that kind of thing are already going to vote for that party. So if you feel very strongly about liberal rights or like access to abortion, for example,
Right.
you're already going to vote for someone like Joe Biden over Trump. So I don't think that will kind of come in as your swing decision. If you're undecided between the two, I'm not necessarily sure that that's going to be the deciding factor.
Okay. So James, I'll come back to you now.
I might offer just a slightly different
please.
opinion on that, which is that if your political voting decisions are decided based on how you think that vote will impact the legal system, then I might suggest you have a worrying entanglement of the two, which I think America definitely does have.
Yeah.
Which is, as in from a law background, I think the involvement of politics in the judicial process is never a good thing.
And vice versa, involvement of the judicial establishment in political processes as well.
Well, there has to be a balance between the two.
Because I remember when last September, Brenda Hale and so there were 11 justices, right? Do we even say justices in the UK? Like Supreme Court judges who said that Parliament hadn't been prorogued and the Parliament was called back. The session, the session that the Boris Johnson administration had tried to prorogue in their minds perfectly legally, couldn't be prorogued because of this extraordinary intervention coming from the Supreme Court. And I mean, it is worth bearing in mind that the UK Supreme Court in its present form didn't really exist before 2009, 8, 9, whatever.
About 9.
I remember some so-called legal experts pointing out on Twitter that this is an American-style intervention in politics from the courts. And if such kinds of intervention are to continue, then Supreme Court justices should be confirmed by Senate hearings. But the thing is, what is the parallel of the Senate in the British system? House of Lords?
Well, I mean, of course, the before the Supreme Court existed, there were lords, and that was the highest court in land, and they literally sat in the House of Lords.
Justice Pierce, right? That was the name?
Spears?
No. The peers who used to be in the House of Lords so that they can act as justices. Wasn't there a name for them, like Justice?
Law Lords.
Law Lords.
They were called the Law Lords.
Yeah. And that had been a tradition going back centuries, right? All the way
to and there was a particular individual as well called the Lord Chancellor who had a seat both in Parliament on the highest court, which was itself inside of Parliament, and also in the executive as well. So in terms of separation of powers, he was sort of the epitome of not one.
Yeah, right. No, I was coming to you to ask. I was going to come to you to ask, what do you think of this argument that let's not worry about whether or not, like Judge Amy Coney Barrett gets confirmed. Let's hope that Biden wins. Say you're a Democrat, or not just a Democrat. Say you're an anti-Trump Republican, or it could be even, I don't know.
Well, I think if speaking specifically about Amy Coney Barrett, you could be an anti-Trump Republican and still be absolutely gasping for her to be confirmed.
Of course.
Because she represents Republican ideals, they think, anyway.
Yeah, and this sort of like political opportunism has always been there in the American system. Like if a liberal justice dies at a very opportune moment, then everyone is going to want, everyone who is of a different bent of mind, politically speaking, will want that person to be replaced by someone from their side. It happened when Clarence Thomas was confirmed, right? He replaced, He replaced someone who had been appointed by JFK or I don't know, FDR, like
I believe it was Thurgood Marshall.
Thurgood Marshall, yes, the first black justice, right? The first
correct.
Supreme Court justice. He was one of the key voices in the Brown versus Board of Education and all that.
Yep,
Yes,
he was.
that's exactly right. Yeah, and so there you have it. And what year was it? 92, 91?
It might be
91.
Yeah.
It was 91.
Very close to. I mean, was it very close to the election?
There is, in fact, there's quite a horrifying, I suppose, in retrospect, horrifying interview that took place between John Oliver, the host of Last Week Tonight,
and Anita Hill.
Correct, yes, and he asked her. Anita Hill, for those who don't know, leveled some very serious sexual misconduct allegations against
Christine Blasey Ford of the early 90s. I mean, not the Christine Blasey Ford of the early 90s, but it was a similar situation, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes, against Clarence Thomas. Became a very politically divisive issue, and he was one of the first justices to be confirmed along a vote that was strictly down party lines because of it.
Oh.
And Anita Hill, I think it must have been 2014 or 15, was asked by John Oliver about that event and the fact that they pretty much just ended up ignoring what she had to say and confirmed him anyway. And she said, well, I mean, do you think that could happen now? And she said at the time, I don't think the environment, in this environment now, I don't think it would be possible for that to happen again. And obviously, a few years later, we have Brett Kavanaugh sitting in the exact same position.
Exact same position. And, well, I mean, things from the 90s come back to haunt people in the most remarkable ways. I remember, I mean, this is, of course, not related to what we were discussing just now. I remember a tweet saying, I think it was meant for young girls, like, girls, don't worry, whatever happens in your 20s is not going to haunt you for life. And then Monica Lewinsky retweeted it saying, or something. So what I was going to say to you, ask you was, if you are a Democrat, if you want, say, Trump to not win, or if you want a liberal person or a liberal, like quote unquote, liberal justice to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, wouldn't you now think that the better option for you, the more realistic option for you, is to hope that Biden will win and Biden will pull off what FDR tried to do?
Stack the court.
Stacking the courts.
Okay, I think for that there's a wider discussion to have about what I think is, and I think what Chief Justice John Roberts in particular in recent years has come to notice is becoming the Supreme Court's biggest threat, which is its perceived legitimacy.
Right.
And I think the main reason that, I mean, when John Roberts first joined the court,
He was a Reagan appointee, wasn't he?
No, John Roberts was a George W. Bush.
George W. Bush.
Yep, appointee.
Yeah.
And he, when he first joined the court, there was no question about it. He was on the right of the court. He was most frequently voting along with Alito, who was appointed at the same time as him, and Scalia, and Thomas. There was no doubt he was a permanent fixture of the right of the court. Since 2012, his position has definitely been a lot more fluid, and I think that's a large part due to Citizens United of 2010, when I think the court probably had its shakiest year of existence since Bush v. Gore, in terms of its perceived legitimacy. And ever since then, the Chief Justice has been a very savvy manipulator of how the court has been working in terms of how. So take Obergefell Hodges, the case that made gay marriage legal across the whole United States. Obviously, this used to be a thing. States by states it was going, and liberals used to cheer each state that did it. And then the Supreme Court came and said, no, whole country. And it was Anthony Kennedy, who at the time was the swing justice of the court, but typically another Republican appointee, a Reagan appointee.
Replaced by Kavanaugh, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yes, he was. He wrote the opinion for it, so he was the swing vote in it. John Roberts actually dissented against the rest of the court. He voted, that no, actually there shouldn't be gay marriage for the whole country. But what's funny is the Chief Justice, one of the things that makes his role unique compared to the other justice is he picks who writes the opinions.
Yeah.
And he is extremely gifted in being able to pick people who he thinks will come to a particular decision that he wants to see, I think. Obviously, it's impossible to really know what goes on behind those closed doors. But it's interesting that he picked Anthony Kennedy to write that judgment, because Anthony Kennedy actually had a track record of very favorable opinions towards LGBT rights. And so, you just wonder, the fact that he picked him, is he just doing that to,
That's a very good point.
Because if the Liberal justices had been given, one of the Liberal justices had been given the position to write the leading opinion, they could have written it in a way that Justice Kennedy may not have agreed with, and therefore it would have fell the other way. So letting him write it himself is a very clear, at least I think, a very clear tactic into why that was.
Catherine, again, coming to the politics side of it, what do you think is going to be a major factor behind Trump's defeat, if that defeat happens? Because one-term presidents, of course, there are precedents for one-term presidents in the past century, but very often, it happens under very exceptional circumstances, I would say. For example, I was reading about how Carter got defeated, and there was the hostage crisis in Iran. And I used to think, well, when I first read about the hostage crisis and America's botched attempt at rescuing the hostages, and how they basically left in the desert pages and pages of important classified documents, and whatnot. It was a disaster. I just think people saw that, Americans saw that, and thought their commander-in-chief was incompetent. But that apparently didn't happen. Apparently, when the hostage crisis was at its peak, Carter's approval ratings were quite high. What happened was, right after that, there was not a depression, but something economic, and that brought him down. And there were other factors, of course, when Clinton defeated Bush Senior. What do you think could be a big factor if behind Trump's defeat, again, as I asked earlier, if that defeat happens? Could the Supreme Court be an issue there? The obvious two-facedness of the Senate Republicans?
I mean, it would be very interesting to see what this election would have looked like without COVID, and what it will look like now because of COVID, because I think the pandemic will have quite a big impact on the results, I think. I mean, Trump was presiding at the beginning of the year over a very good economy. Unemployment rates were very low, and I think generally the economy is a very big factor for the way a lot of people vote, and I think that's something that's very much true across time, and I think crises like the one you described with the hostage situation are quite good opportunities for presidents to build their kind of build their popularity, I suppose, before the election. I think that happened in 2012 as well with Obama and Mitt Romney. I think there was hurricane or some sort of natural disaster.
Hurricane Katrina, that was 2007, wasn't it?
Hurricane Sandy, I think.
Sandy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this was a bit different to the pandemic, because the pandemic's gone on for so much longer, and it started right at the beginning of the year, way before the election. Whereas with what happened in 2012, it was very close to the election. So it took Mitt Romney off, almost off news, really, for a couple of days, because there was images of Obama helping pack water into helicopters that was far more kind of prominent. I mean, I certainly wouldn't say that's the reason he won the election, but it's a bit of a boost right at the end. So I think COVID is going to be a big kind of factor in this election. And in terms of reference to the Supreme Court, I very much hope that it doesn't end up in the Supreme Court like Bush v. Gore did in 2000. I don't think it will, just because I think if it's looking close, I think Biden will win a few more states. I don't think it will come down to one particular state like it
The
did.
electoral college count in 2000 was what, 271,266 or something, right? Or 271,266, I think it was. Like very, very close. Like had Florida gone to Gore, it would have been game over for Bush. No, this thing about dominating airwaves. I mean, that's of course a very important point. But don't you think? I mean, well, people used to say about Theresa May, for example, that whenever there used to be a terrorist attack, she used to be in her best element. Whenever she used to like address the nation and talk about the security response and all that, because apparently she'd been quite, well, I wouldn't say competent as a home secretary, but she knew the right words, she knew the right terms, she knew the right phrases, right? She could strike the right tone. But still, like even then, she used to be not very good with the polls, right? Well, maybe it's a British example which doesn't quite translate into the US political scene. Anyway, coming back to, like, again, I'll ask you one more question, Catherine, here. Coming back to why Trump might lose. So you think it will be more about COVID and the economy, like, and but again, the economy factor is very much interlinked with the COVID factor. So you will think it will be very much those rather than any number of his follies that have like, occurred over the past few years. And I believe that it is likely because obviously, like, say I am an anti-Trump person and I want to vote against him. How many factors can I keep in my head while I'm in the voting booth? Like, say, I don't know, say I was very pro NAFTA or something. Did he pull US? Yeah, yeah. Say I was very pro NAFTA. Say I was very pro, I don't know, the UN Human Rights Council or whatever. Like, how many factors can I keep in my head? So
I
yeah,
think
so
the thing with Trump is, particularly with Trump supporters more specifically, is over the past 4 years, I've sort of come to the conclusion that it often doesn't matter what he does, what outrageous things he does, they still support him absolutely to the end. There's this kind of blinding loyalty there, which I think is quite unusual to have in a politician. That this kind of mantra that they can do no wrong, really. So I think the real key thing with this election, as with many elections, will be the turnout and the kind of get out the vote effort that the Democrats can have, because Trump's really, really ardent supporters, the ones that, you know, will be with him regardless of what he says or does, will support him, you know, regardless of his handling of COVID or the economy. So I think the really key thing will be what everyone else does, particularly people in those really key states that are
Wisconsin.
maybe more independent leaning or maybe don't normally go out to vote, but perhaps would vote Democrat. Is so often the way with people that don't vote.
Do you think there is any truth to the fact that too many people who would vote Trump or will vote Trump aren't telling the people who are calling them, asking which party they're going to vote, which candidate they're going to vote for? Do you think there's any truth to that? That there is a huge number of people who aren't, or who are not lying to the pollsters, who are basically not cooperating with the pollsters, and
Yeah, I mean, I
that
think
is showing in the polling numbers, and so there is no grounds for complacency for the Democrats. Do you think there's any truth to that?
I mean, I certainly don't think after 2016, people should ever assume that it's in the bag, because I think a lot of people very much thought that when Clinton was up against Trump, that, you know, it was going to be an absolute walk in the park. And I think
Yeah,
definitely after that experience, there shouldn't be that complacency anymore.
yeah, and James can correct me here, but wasn't Clinton always polling very poorly in states like Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, and like
It's
most of
even
the flyover states, basically? Wasn't she always polling very poorly there?
she her I mean they poll on individuals in many different ways, and in terms of favorability, she never polled very well anywhere. She, you know, she just wasn't, you know, popular in her personality, as I remember. I think I think one of the big things that, you know, decided where Trump won and how he won is to do with a very complicated and a very multifaceted approach to voter selection and suppression that is sweeping across not just America, but a lot of democracies, but in America in particular.
It's happening in India, even South Africa, Brazil. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the more horrifying examples at the moment is targeted political ads, which are designed, which run basically off an algorithm that try and figure out how likely you are as a person to vote for Trump, Clinton, or you sort of fall into 5 brackets of completely don't know, lean Trump, strong Trump, lean Clinton, strong Clinton, and they target that lean Clinton and that central bracket with these algorithms and try and send them as many negative campaign ads as possible, basically just as a way to make them stay at home. And so there's a recent report out that shows that in black or otherwise ethnic minority areas in the United States, there was a disproportionately high amount of these ads targeted towards individuals, which goes some way to explaining why the black vote completely collapsed for Clinton compared to what it had been for Obama.
And like these people, like people often make a lot of noise about those voters who voted for Obama twice and then voted for Trump. Do you think in the years to come there will be a similar amount of like noise being made about people who voted for like Trump in 2016? I don't know, like who voted Republican over the past, I don't know how many years, and then they voted for Bush twice, voted for Trump, voted for Romney, voted for John McCain, and then voted for Biden in 2020. Do you think there will be many people like that?
I think there's a lot of people who fall into that bracket because a big part of the Republican wing, the part at least that's true to its or at least true to what it professes, should be completely opposed to Trump in every kind of way. It's the fact that one of the big questions leading up to the 2016 election or not was whether or not Trump was going to try and make a relationship with the evangelical, the righteous right voter. And it seemed like for the longest time he wasn't, and then eventually he did, and they went out and voted for him in droves. But which still confounds me, bearing in mind, well,
in the US, you can't really win a major election without like taking the religious on board. Can you?
Well, I mean, yeah, the religious is like 70% or more of the population. So I mean, obviously, but I mean, I'm talking about a very specific faction.
No, but what I mean to say is, like, you will remember this, of course, like in the build-up to the 2015 election here, Miliband said very clearly on that debate with Paxman on Channel 4. He didn't say it there, but he had said it previously, and he would confirm it if anyone asked him about it again, that he was a believing atheist, but not a believing atheist, that he was an atheist. He was culturally Jewish, whatever. And he used to often say that he wanted to be the first Jewish prime minister, although I don't know, wasn't Disraeli the first, whatever. So
yeah, Disraeli would have been.
so the thing is, like in the UK, it didn't seem to matter that much in 2015 that Miliband was openly atheist.
We're a very irreligious country compared to the United States. Religious hot potatoes are everywhere in American politics, between press and school, abortion rights, even like the Pledge of Allegiance, putting the Ten Commandments up in courtrooms, which still actually is being attempted in various counties, primarily in the South, all of which have
they have "In God We Trust" on their dollar bills, don't they?
Yes, they do.
I think it was introduced during Eisenhower's first term or something to draw a distinction with the godless Russians.
Yeah, well, there's certainly been there's an erosion, at least between the the
Yeah.
perception of a separation of church and state. Although, yeah, I mean, if you listen to the current rhetoric, if you listen to one side of it, you'd believe that there never was a separation of church and state, and which obviously is not true.
Yeah, I mean, it's in that letter from Jefferson. I read in that book by Christopher Hitchens. I mean, the first, like, there will be the phrase a wall of separation between church and state was in a letter by Jefferson to some group of Christians.
Well, it was more than just that. It was I mean, it was common knowledge. I mean, that's just one particular example that explained the position especially well. But ultimately, the founders unanimously agreed that whenever you incorporate a particular
Your voice is
everyone else.
Yeah. It's okay. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that I mean, yeah, it was well known why they went for that route.
Catherine, let me come to you now with a question on the importance of the Roe v. Wade decision from '73. Do you think there is any, and of course, like James is the legal expert here, I'll come to him. I'll go to him with this question in a minute. Like, do you think there is any realistic possibility that Roe v. Wade is going to be overturned, like not like undone bit by bit? Like, do you think there's any realistic possibility of that? And I ask this because there have been like different kinds of attempts by Republicans over the past few years. Like whenever, like, wasn't there a case from Louisiana where there was a law that required doctors who provided abortions to make sure that there were hospitals nearby which had certain privileges and facilities. And I think that law was struck down, was it not? And before that, there was a law in Texas or whatever, which was again struck down. So every time there's been petitions before the Supreme Court asking them to strike down Roe v. Wade once and for all, they have shied away from doing so. I mean, that's what I see when I look into the history. So is there any realistic possibility that it will be overturned? What do you think?
I mean, I think this kind of goes back to what James was saying earlier about challenging the legitimacy of the court.
Yeah.
I think if Roe v. Wade were to get struck down, it would be a massive challenge to its legitimacy because essentially, you know, the law hasn't changed. The ruling hasn't changed, it's the same. But because you've got new people sitting on the court, 3 of them which have been appointed recently, probably by Trump, suddenly you've got this radically different where actually it's not legal anymore. So I think that will present a massive challenge to the Supreme Court's legitimacy if that does happen. I think it's far more likely that what tends to happen is certain states, particularly ones that are quite conservative and often Republican in nature, like Texas, for example, introduce certain laws at the state level, which make it quite difficult for women to access abortion. So, you know, they limit to only having 1 abortion clinic in the state, or women have to have a ultrasound scan before they're allowed to have an abortion, just things like that. And I think it's far more likely that those kind of cases will end up in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will perhaps decide that actually, yes, it's fine that a massive state like Texas only has 1 abortion clinic, or women have to have an ultrasound scan before they're allowed to have an abortion. I think that's a more likely route, perhaps, but I would definitely not rule out, you know, Roe v. Wade being significantly challenged. And I think the very fact that this could provide an opportunity for abortion law to maybe be passed through Congress rather than being law because the Supreme Court has had it to be.
No, but
obviously that presents a bit of a challenge to it because it can be overturned much easier if it's gone through Congress and is an act of law rather than a Supreme Court ruling. But I think it does give it it gives it more legitimacy coming through Congress than it does being decided by Supreme Court justices that can change from the 1970s to present day, depending on who's sitting on the court.
No, but wasn't the decision essentially a right to privacy decision?
Yeah, it was, and which is why I think if it was I mean, you can't really transcribe a decision made by the court into a law in Congress. However, just say theoretically you could do that. So the right became something that is only a right because Congress said it was a right, rather than because it was something that the court found through the spirit of the Constitution.
Because they have
That would be, I would see this court striking that down within a heartbeat, and then there would be no right to abortion. But of course, that whole process is impossible. Interestingly, I read a bit of transcript from Amy Coney Barrett's previous appointment.
What was the previous appointment? She was on one of the circuit courts, wasn't she?
Yeah, she's So during her hearing, then she was asked about Roe v. Wade and the possibility of it being overturned, and she answered quite clearly, which is really unusual for a potential nominee to a court to do. Normally, they would say it's inappropriate for me to comment on a case before it's actually brought before me. But on this one, she said she didn't. I mean, I suppose she was evasive in a way, but she said she couldn't see a way. She couldn't see the possibility or foresee the possibility that Roe v. Wade would be overturned outright, which I think is probably not limited to her. I think that's probably thinking that would be more common on the court than just simply on the liberal wing. Overturning Roe versus Wade outright, it's just, I don't see it being on the cards, especially not with Roberts at the helm. Really, what the strategy is now is, as far as those who oppose abortion, is state level. And you mentioned earlier about these specific cases that the Supreme Court are basically asking to restrict Roe versus Wade more. And they, as you correctly point out, they're basically saying, no, we're not doing that for you. It's actually, you're right, and it perhaps gives the impression that the court is really helping to protect Roe versus Wade, but it's actually all the cases that you don't hear about, that the Supreme Court never hear, that are actually helping to chisel away at abortion rights in the United States. So you take any state that has been controlled by Republicans, obviously, because they are the anti-abortion party. They are enacting laws of various measures to restrict, whether it be restricting the number of clinics open or being involved in the process of how an abortion gets done, like with ultrasounds and everything like this.
There are some more ridiculous and more sinister ones, right? Like you have to make sure the mother, like the woman in question, the candidate abortionee or whatever the term should be, gets to see a sonograph or gets to hear a heartbeat or whatever.
Yes,
so that you can emotionally, I don't know, put them in a spot so that
all of this, and obviously because there are so many different means that they're testing on how they can restrict access to abortions. I doubt all of these efforts are actually challenged in the courts on all fronts all the time. But even the ones that do, even if they make it past several courts, obviously if they're making it through the court system, the state court system in Mississippi, because again, judges, you have to remember, at state level are almost entirely elected. And so in a state like Mississippi, the judges are almost entirely going to be Republican, or at least courts are going to be Republican dominated. So they say that these laws are correct, and then it gets passed up to the federal courts. Then you've got a kind of maybe, but probably not at the moment, because the federal courts have been absolutely stacked now with Trump appointees. Everyone's focusing on the Supreme Court at the moment, of course.
Federal courts, right? Yes, okay.
The federal courts have had a complete overhaul by the Trump administration, and they have stacked through more candidates left when they wouldn't appoint anyone that confirm anyone that Obama appointed. That the whole nature of the federal court system has completely changed, but everyone's obviously only really focused on the Supreme Court. I'd say you need to look a bit further down. So the chances of those courts actually finding that these laws are restrict the right of Roe v. Wade and then it gets turned to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court can go, yes, we'll hear. But a lot of the time, in fact, with most of these cases, because there are just so many of them, they don't hear it.
Yeah, and also one interesting, and this is a comment. This is not exactly a question. Like I remember when the pro-augment debate was going on at the UK Supreme Court, and you could hear what the like lawyers were arguing, and almost all of the arguments were, of course, very, very long and boring, but still articulate and coherent.
Oh, what do you mean boring? They were amazing.
No, sure, sure, sure. Now, what I'm saying is, there is this thing of pulling out international precedents. Like, for example, there was a lot of precedents being pulled out from New Zealand, uh, maybe Ireland, like many countries which follow a similar legal system, not exactly like a congruent legal system, but a similar legal system. There were examples being pulled out to say that such a decision cannot be justiciable, or someone else would say this can be justiciable and whatnot. So I'm saying, I am guessing, like one of the darling countries for the anti-abortion right for the longest time used to be the Republic of Ireland. I'm guessing, right,
Yes.
for obvious reasons. And now that post the 2018 referendum, 2018 referendum, Ireland has legalized abortion. But I'm not sure if they have legalized already. Like they said they were going to. That's what the referendum said, the Eighth Amendment referendum. So do you think the legal case for it in the US will suffer a blow because Ireland is off the map, or do you think it's not just
So
necessary?
there is something, if there is anything that unites any Supreme Court throughout most of history, even on the right and the left.
Something was wrong with your. Okay, say something.
Is that okay?
There's something wrong with the. What's the word like?
I think
There's
it's
a
the
lot of-
microphone.
Yeah.
The microphone. That's strange. Is it?
Suddenly,
Does that sound
there's a
good?
lot of like.
Is it okay now?
No, no.
Oh, it's not.
Can you try without the microphone for a bit?
How about now?
No. Something's like suddenly happened, and I can hear you. I can hear you, but there's a like lot of additional noise.
Okay, how about now?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay, go on.
Yeah, so there's certainly one thing that's united Supreme Courts throughout most of United States history, and certainly it's not really seen as a right or left issue, to my knowledge, is that the United States Constitution and the Supreme Court that interprets it views it in isolation.
Right.
I do not know of a single Supreme Court decision I have ever read that has ever referred to another country's practices, laws, or rulings.
Right.
And Scalia once wrote an essay. I can't remember if it was part of one of his books, but it was
He has quite a few books.
absolutely repellent to the suggestion or idea that it would ever do something as
But don't you think that?
terrible as.
But don't you think that was more because Scalia came from the U.S. exceptionalist right, rather than?
Originalist.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, he was on the right, and he would have held that line more hardly than
Right.
perhaps one of the more as we call liberal justices. But even so, it's not really a practice that's
Yeah.
common to the court. I can think of no case that has, even when they've been dealing with cases to do with Guantanamo Bay, whatever laws of Cuba didn't come into it.
Right. That's a very good point. I'm guessing
It wouldn't have even got a mention, perhaps apart from like geographical reference for the facts.
I'm guessing the same would be the case with, I don't know, Abu Ghraib. I don't know if there were any laws that sanctioned the establishment of Abu Ghraib. I mean, Abu Ghraib was already there, of course. Like Saddam used it for his own purposes.
Yeah.
I'll come to Catherine. Like maybe we can have a final few points / questions on politics, and not so much on Supreme Court anymore. So talking of like reasons why Trump might lose, Biden might lose, etc., etc. Do you think like, of course, I have no idea how much Brexit is an issue in the US, but I saw that Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, said that she was very much opposed to the internal market bill that the Boris Johnson administration was trying to pass through Parliament here. He did pass it, right? It's passed now, right? If I'm not wrong, whatever. So do you think these sort of issues, like which can be interpreted by, I don't know, fair-minded people as interfering in other countries' matters? I mean, of course, in this case, it had to do with international law, commitments to the international order, and a lot of other things. So do you think these kind of issues can uh, like dissuade someone from thinking that Pelosi and her like are for I don't know, decency, or for diplomacy? Because to my mind, it seemed like saying all that on Twitter and then to Sky wasn't exactly very diplomatic, or wasn't exactly very, what should I say, courteous.
Yeah, I mean, I am very much of the opinion that when people vote, they mostly kind of think about their own situations and
Right. Yes.
particularly their own country. I'm not sure that anyone will be kind of voting and thinking about how their president would
Mm-hmm.
handle the issue of, Brexit, because they don't really see it as anything much to do with them. I think
Mm-hmm.
they're very much more focused on things that affect their everyday life, which will often be things like the economy,
Jobs. Yeah.
unemployment rates. And then, there are things that do feed into it. I'd say, obviously, after 2001,
Mm-hmm.
uh, they very much were kind of looking abroad a bit more. But again, that circles back to it being about their own safety.
Mm-hmm.
They felt under threat after 2001. And so, were looking outwards to kind of protect themselves in their minds.
Right.
But I don't think this election will be particularly centered on foreign affairs. I don't
Right.
think. Mostly, I think because, well, probably not even before that, but with the pandemic,
Yeah.
I think will
Yeah.
be very much countries will be looking inwards, shutting borders and trying to find ways to keep their own population safe
Yeah,
rather than.
yeah, but if we say talk about voting blocks, like there was of course this. Well, I'm not sure if it was an anti-Semitic thing to say that the Dems had the Jews, like the Jewish Americans used to vote predominantly Democrat. What's the word? They used to vote for the Democrats more often than not. So do you think like these sort of things can change given that there's the Israel UAE peace deal and the, I don't know, the embassy has moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and these sort of things? Or do you think there's still, I mean, do you think like, as I said just now, foreign affairs maybe isn't going to be much of a factor?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is with the voting blocks is that they can always shift over time. I mean, the Democrats used to have a commanding majority in all of the South, and that very much
Well, that
changed,
was,
actually changed quite quickly.
yeah.
So I think, voting block, and we were talking earlier about people that voted for Obama but then not Clinton. So I think the reliance on certain blocks certainly isn't, they can't be trusted. They shift and they move as they always will do in politics. But I think this election will be very interesting, particularly because it's the only one that's happened in a pandemic in living memory.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. There was a Spanish influenza.
22? Yeah, 20.
Yeah, but that's not, I wouldn't say that's living memory for most people.
Okay, living, okay, it did say living memory. Right, that's right. Who won in 22? Hoover. Was it
No,
Hoover?
he was a bit later, wasn't he? He was 1928. Just
Right.
If
before.
it was later, I believe it was Calvin Coolidge, and then
Then he died, right?
one of them did, and then was it Warren G. Harding?
Yeah, and then Hoover, and then FDR, and we know the rest.
In fact, I knew that. Yeah, good me.
Yeah. No, so yeah, so James, Catherine, like, do you have any final points to add regarding the politics? Like any miscellaneous points, anything? Just you can just say it.
Maybe something like to reassure a little bit about the Supreme Court. I know a lot of people, quite worried about the fact that Trump has got two nominees on there so far, and he's
Three.
likely to
Yeah,
get a
three.
third. And they might be reflections of him. But I would point out that
So who
Gorsuch
leads?
wrote an opinion not too long ago, which expanded the meaning of the Civil Rights Act. Just to be clear,
Mm-hmm.
Gorsuch, a conservative justice who has been, presumed to be part of the one of the originalist kind of minded justices, he expanded the meaning of the Civil Rights Act to include not just minorities but LGBTQ
Mm-hmm.
people. Um, and he wrote the lead opinion on that.
I was aware
Um,
of the decision, but I wasn't aware that it was he who had written the lead opinion.
yeah, he did, and in fact, there's a fantastic line in it that goes. I don't think I'll remember it verbatim, but he said that just because the people that wrote it at the time didn't envisage it applying to these people makes no argument for why it
Right.
shouldn't.
It shouldn't be. Right.
Which is a very, that is not originalist, textualist kind of thinking.
But then again, as you said a little while ago, maybe the Chief Justice picked him to write the lead opinion because he knew.
Well, yeah, and maybe the Chief Justice sat him down in his office when he first joined the court and said, "Look, I'm worried about the future legitimacy of this court. We've got to be right about this thing." But even so, I mean, I would not have, if Gorsuch had voted the other way in that particular judgment, I would not have quickly, got a torch and said illegitimacy, because that would have been very just standard practice for a conservative justice to do, and they wouldn't have necessarily been wrong either.
Right.
But he didn't.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, I didn't know this, so yeah, that's a good point. Also, like, I think, um, yeah. So I think one of you said this a little while ago. So the chances of this election going to the Supreme Court are low. I mean, do both of you agree?
I hope so. I very much hope so. I mean, from
Oh,
the things I've read, it seems that it won't come down to one state. Basically, no one's predicting
But the
which
things that
way
I
it
have
will go.
read, but the things that I have read seem to be saying that Trump might win on the night. I mean, it won't probably be a win in the proper sense of the term, but then, like, with all the votes counted, like postal ballots and whatnot, Biden will win, and that will, like, dissatisfy the
there are so many ways, unfortunately, that Trump could, or any candidate could actually steal the election, despite what the vote is. States send what are called
Mm, mm,
electoral
mm.
college voters, and a Republican-controlled state could, in theory, send a group of electors to vote on its behalf. They could all be faithless.
Yeah.
Their state could have gone, fully Biden. Let's say, it was Ohio, 18 voted for Biden, so 18 electoral college votes for Biden, but instead the House send 18 faithless electors to go
Right.
and give
Right.
the votes to Trump instead. And I see that as being, even though it's horrifying, far more likely than the court being the one that you know, robs the election, if you like.
Like in the Gore v. Bush episode, wasn't there
Mm.
the Secretary of State from Florida, Catherine Johnson? Yeah, Catherine Harris, who had already called Florida for Bush, and what the Supreme Court basically did was, like, said we are going to go with that. Didn't that?
They basically, well, yeah, complicated. Um, so the Florida Supreme
There was a
Court
recount. There was a recount going on that the court asked to put a halt.
the
Yeah.
Florida Supreme Court ruled that there could be a recount,
Okay.
and then the Supreme Court ruled that no, there couldn't be a recount because there would be a violation of a particular clause of the Constitution, which meant that different votes were being treated differently,
Mm-hmm.
and that the Florida Supreme Court had violated that act that part of the Constitution by allowing a recount in the way that they did it, and also there wasn't, not they use these words, but basically there wasn't enough time before the convention to
like
do
December.
anything.
This was December 12th, 13th, that sort of time.
18th, I think.
Okay, yeah. Well,
or 12th. Yeah, no, 12th is right.
Yeah, so we are gonna hope nothing like that happens this time.
Yeah, I think Roberts would more likely just refuse to hear it.
Yeah, I see.
Or the court refuse to
agree,
hear it.
I think particularly because he is very worried about his court being seen as not
as James was saying, yes.
Yeah, and I think the Bush v. Gore decision of 2000, it's remembered for handing Bush the election, and everyone's always questioned over whether he would have actually won it had that not happened. So, that
interesting tidbit, by the way. John Roberts actually worked as legal counsel for the Bush side in that case.
Yeah, how tight.
But I definitely don't think he wants that to be on his plate.
Didn't Bush Jr., as in like George W. Bush, come very close to endorsing Biden this time?
Well, he and his father, in a joint interview in 2016, the elder Bush said he was voting for Clinton, which was amazing considering her husband had booted him out. And the younger Bush said that he wasn't sure that he was going to vote for Clinton, but he wasn't going to be voting for Trump.
Why? Because Trump had insulted his brother?
I don't know. Maybe he just thought that, for whatever reason, he thought Trump probably wasn't a fit person to be president. Don't know where he'd have got the idea from, but
yeah, right. People will wonder. Yeah, like the legitimacy question has always been like I remember reading what was it? Comey's memoir. What was it called? Loyalty? A higher loyalty or something?
A higher loyalty, yeah.
I remember him saying very explicitly in that book that the only reason why he held a press conference of his own and said that he was going to open an investigation, and then later that he was going to reopen one and the rest of it. The reason why he did all that was because he was worried that the Justice Department, he was worried that the FBI was going to lose legitimacy because Loretta Lynch had met with Bill Clinton in a plane somewhere. So like people do like worry about, like in the US at least, the legitimacy of institutions quite a lot. I don't see such arguments being made in the UK that much, to be honest. Like I'm worried about the legitimacy of, I don't know, this chamber, so I'm not going to do this or do that.
Oh, there's through things like the FBI, the heads of them are so much more publicly in the eye, ultimately because they are made as political appointments, I think. Whereas I'm certain that none of us know the name of the head of MI5. Yeah,
So do we think that's where a lot of like the legitimacy problems of the various US institutions, including the Supreme Court, come from, is the fact that they tend to be political appointments? And I've always found it very odd that, like, when particularly recently when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, she's framed on people's bedroom walls. She's very much like,
that's a bit odd.
Well, she's very much like a political figure. I mean, very prominent in the public eye, much in the way that a politician is. And I think particularly in more recent years, when it increasingly seems that the Supreme Court votes along what we could describe as partisan lines, if you're appointed by Obama, you tend to vote Liberal. If you're appointed by a Republican president, you vote more, you tend to side with the Conservative side. I think that does really challenge the legitimacy of its decisions, because it makes it seem that they're almost a bit more temporary than they should be, because they very much depend on the whims of the current justices at the time. I think that is the perception that a lot of people have with it.
I'll make 3 small points here and then we can stop recording. No, actually, after stopping recording, we can speak for a bit on a different link, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Too. So I'll make 3 small points. I remember when the Monica Lewinsky scandal was blowing up, C-SPAN used to have this program. Well, C-SPAN had this program all through the 90s, maybe all the way into the mid 2000s even, where people used to call in and ask questions like all through the morning for hours and hours. And Peter Hitchens was on one of those programs, and he made a very bizarre point, which sounded very, very strange when I first heard it. He said, "Well, you guys, what you guys don't realize, but you guys Americans, that the president here is like a king. So the position that he holds is a position that like people all over the land look to with respect. The position. So for someone in that position to be involved in a scandal, like the Monica Lewinsky scandal of that time, was a big deal in the eyes of many people. Whereas if it had happened in the UK, the prime minister would just have resigned, right? A resignation followed by.
I mean, we could have actually tested that in the 90s because our prime minister in the 90s did have an affair of a similar nature.
When was it?
And he didn't resign. This was one of his own MPs.
Oh yes, yes. I think Peter Hitchens mentioned that thing in the very same answer that I'm trying to cite. So that's number one. And number two is the thing that you were just talking about, the Catherine talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and how people reacted uh, post her death. It reminded me a bit of the way people reacted when Diana died. Like she wasn't an HRH when she died. She was someone who had been married to uh, Prince Charles. I mean, when her death happened, when was this? 97. But still, like the way people reacted at her funeral, like the hearse arrives and people start cheering, and I mean, and they are sending letters addressed to her, not to her family, which is like standard practice. And again, like one of the other Hitchens brothers, well, the other Hitchens brother, Christopher Hitchens, did a very amusing documentary on this called "The Morning After." You should see it. It's on YouTube. And I mean, all the points were so obvious to me as he was making them. But like I had a similar feeling when I saw people who probably has no idea about any of the legal opinions that RPG wrote over her like long and distinguished career, like putting up her picture as their profile pictures and saying, "You've been an inspiration to me," blah blah blah. Like how? Like anyway, like that's the thing. But the thing is, I don't think people would have done the same. People would do the same with, say, I don't know, Clarence Thomas. He is, after all, the second black justice on the Supreme Court, isn't he? Or say, is Sandra Day O'Connor alive? Yeah,
She is.
I don't think people will do the same when she dies. Like the first woman to serve on the. So, like,
No, I mean probably not to the same level, but I think the vast majority of Americans will know every single justice's name that sits on the Supreme Court in the United States, whereas I don't think many people in the UK could tell you who sits on the Supreme Court in this country. And I think that's good in lots of ways, really. The judiciary is by nature meant to be, quite separate and, almost act as a kind of force over the other branches. But it's very politicized, and I think the way it's talked about and the way people know the justices and how they vote and that kind of thing.
Like, whenever there is an appointment, there's a lot of like brouhaha in the media about it. So
Exactly.
people tend to follow that like charade. One last point that I want to make, and we can just end there. You're talking political appointments. The Bank of England, the chancellor of the Bank of England is a political appointee. Same is the case with the European Central Bank. And like there was an article in The Economist last year, I think, which was talking about how the Fed in the US, the European Central Bank here, the not here like in Europe, in the EU, Bank of England here, like their political appointees are sort of like the possibility that those people could be stooges for their appointers was looking real in a big way in a long time. I mean, I don't think we are still there yet, but the thing is, you wouldn't see Bank of England employees or Bank of England chancellors going out of their way to, I don't know, justify interest rates. Although Mark Carney did a lot of, did put himself in the public eye a bit during the Brexit campaign, did he not? Like at least a bit. Like,
Yeah, of course. And he would have probably considered that he was giving the impartial advice that his subordinates had given him, and he was just making it known. I think ultimately the Supreme Court in the UK are the justices there are appointed by the Prime Minister, so they are in a sense a political appointment. Yeah, but they are.
Don't they rise through the ranks? Like
They rise through the ranks, but I mean, there's a lot of ranks below them, and just below them. But there is a committee of independent experts who make the suggestions to the Prime Minister about who he appoints, and they are independent. They're just a panel of independent experts, and they're the ones who actually make the suggestions, and the Prime Minister just merely performs the official role of
Prime Minister
actually.
isn't legally bound to go with the exact same name, I'm guessing.
Yeah, but I don't really know of there ever being a. I mean, I think they come up with more than one name,
Right, I see. Yeah. Who is
I
the
think
president now? I know it's not Brenda Hill. Sorry, Catherine, go.
I think the thing is, though, with the difference obviously between the UK and the US is quite fundamentally that the constitution is sovereign in the US, whereas here Parliament is sovereign. So if, let's say, there was a situation where the Supreme Court in the UK struck down a law in Parliament, or struck down something that wasn't legal, that
the Parliament can write a law to,
yeah, they just write a law and then it becomes law, and that is, that's got absolute.
It actually happened in India, and the Indian legal system is a very strange mix-up. Like they copied from the UK system and the US system simultaneously. Like there was a very famous law, very famous piece of legislation that was put into place only because the Supreme Court had made a decision to. It was on Muslim inheritance laws, I think, if I'm not wrong. The Supreme Court made a decision on that. The government of the day decided to pass a law undoing that decision, and once that law was made, once that bill was law, basically, like the previous decision became, what's the word, null and void. Yeah, well, I think we have had a very, very informative discussion. Thanks to both of you. I was a bit nervous coming into this because all the sessions that I had conducted before today were sessions that I didn't really need to remember any names for. But here, like, thanks to your answers and the sort of informative nature of them, I felt very comfortable, putting out my own thoughts and opinions. And well, okay, thanks you guys. Stay on for a bit longer. I'll end this call and I'll send you guys a link in the group chat.
Okay, great.
Okay, thanks again.